Hello and welcome to Deep State Radio. I am David Rothkopf, your host, and this week, as every week, we're going to talk about some of the big issues in foreign policy and national security, and we'll do it with some of the best experts that we can find. That includes, of course, um, uh, Rosa Brooks of Georgetown University Law Center. How are you doing, Rosa Brooks?
I'm very good, David. Thank you.
And it also includes our friend Stephen Walt of Harvard's Kennedy School. How are you doing, Steve?
Not bad.
And it may include some other people. We'll just see who joins us here. But I want to start out at about 35,000 feet because, every week there's some new headline and it makes us completely crazy. And we don't really sort of, I don't know, look at the bigger picture. And so, I think you guys are big thinkers, and I'll start with the same question for both of you. If you were sitting with a world leader and they said, look, Trump does this, Trump does that, please explain to me in 3 minutes or less Donald Trump's foreign policy. How would you do that, Steve?
I think the adjective I'd want to use is predatory. Right, that in a sense, he sees the world in completely zero-sum terms, and he wants to use the leverage that the United States has in a variety of places, to its large economy, its military power, its commitments around the world, to extract as many concessions as possible from other countries, whether it's on trade, whether it's on other issues, whether it's occasionally even on peace negotiations. But the whole purpose here is to make sure that the United States gets more out of each of these arrangements than anybody else does. And the real question is, how long can you get away with that? How long can you do that and have other states continue to make concessions, to kowtow, to come to the White House and prostrate themselves in front of Trump without eventually starting to either hedge, make other arrangements, or actively push back? But I think that's how I'd summarize his approach overall to foreign policy.
Huh. Okay, well, that was very restrained. We're also joined by our friend Kori Schake of AEI. How are you doing, Kori?
Exceedingly well, thank you, David. I'm
Well,
sorry to
you know,
bounce in late.
no, it's quite all right. Typically I will give the last question in a cycle to Rosa because she pays me to do that. But I'm going to go to Rosa so that you can hear the question, Kori, and think about it. Rosa,
Yeah,
if
so
you were sitting with a world leader, how would you describe Donald Trump's foreign policy to that world leader?
I actually think Steve was being slightly too generous. Steve described it as predatory. And I think that's right, but incomplete. It's predatory alternating with simply incoherent, and kind of half-assed and a little bit susceptible to occasional uh, things that are predatory in a sense in that they're self-serving, but that are done because somebody has flattered him, that turn out to be good. This is the broken clock, still right twice a day. Every now and then he actually does something that is good, usually for bad reasons. Usually not because he's being wise or being virtuous, but simply because it is, in a predatory sense, it is suddenly convenient for him or someone has flattered him. But I think all of this is either tempered or distempered, perhaps by total incoherence and short attention span, and add a dose of venality and corruption to it, which is not inconsistent with anything Steve said. I think it's just that if it were simply predatory in a really consistent way, we would be seeing a slightly different foreign policy from Donald Trump. We wouldn't be seeing the kind of short attention span. I want Greenland. No, I don't. I'm going to annex Canada. No, I won't. I'm going to go get Putin because he's making me mad. No, I won't. I'm going to arm Ukraine. No, I won't. And I'm going to, I think you have to add in that little extra dollop on top of predatoriness of inattention and incoherence.
So predatory with a scoop of incoherence and a scoop of venality. What do you want to add to the Sunday here, Kori?
So as usual, Rosa is exactly right. So I would add, David, I know you would be disappointed if I didn't dredge up a 19th century Indian Wars example to underscore how right Rosa is. So I will say that when Theodore Roosevelt was asked what he thought of the massacre of Custer's army at Little Bighorn, his reaction was that the human heart has strange and unfathomable depths, and the human mind strange shallows. And I think about that as the application of what Rosa's saying, because Steve's certainly right that there is a predatoriness to Trump policy, a desire to wring every last ounce of leverage out of any potential interaction. But Rosa's right that Stephen gives the Trump team too much credit for strategic direction and ability to carry out a policy effectively. And I would underscore even more than Rosa did the way corruption is central to Trump policy. I mean, I can find no explanation other than maybe Russian money is keeping the Trump empire afloat, or at one point did, as an explanation for the president's odd support for Vladimir Putin. And so I think I would put, to the extent that I have a different view, I would put corruption as more central to Trump's motivations.
So basically, Steve, you're the pro-Trump person here, I think.
Well, actually, I think we're all saying the same thing. I'll just amplify what you both said. I mean, certainly it's incoherent, and that's that's an inevitable consequence of trying to treat every bilateral relationship in a predatory way. So on the one hand, you want to screw over China, but on the other hand, you're trying to screw over South Korea and Japan and our allies in Asia at the same time. Those two things don't make sense.
It's so hard.
They're incoherent. That's exactly right.
But not Argentina. Go on.
Well, and Kori's absolutely right too, that corruption is part of this. The predatory nature is not just, extracting benefits for the United States as a whole. It's clear that extracting benefits for the Trump organization and for Trump personally is a key motivation here as well, which of course reinforces incoherence as well. So I am fully on board with the condemnation we are collectively delivering.
It's beautiful to watch all of you work in unison like that. Let me pose another question, and I'll just throw it to you in the order we're here. Steve just said something, so I'll go to Kori, then Rosa, and then Steve. But say you're sitting with this political leader of another nation, and they said, "Okay, well, thank you. Now, what am I supposed to do with that?" Like, some political leaders think the answer is stroke Trump's ego. And some political leaders think the answer is play to the corruption. We had the Indonesian president the other day at the peace thing talking to Trump going, "So could you give me Don Jr.'s number?" I mean, it was a little strange. And then there's yet another group of political leaders, smaller group, but a group nonetheless, who think that the way to respond to Trump is to get tough with him. And the leader of this group is Xi Jinping. And Xi Jinping's response is, "Oh yeah, you want to play, buddy? Okay, I'll play," and comes at him pretty hard. Kori, which approach would you advise people to use?
So you left out the third category of countries who are America's closest friends and allies, the countries that cannot, for their own domestic reasons, indulge the corruption, right? The government of Denmark can't offer seedy backroom deals on crypto to Eric Jr. because the Danish people and the Danish parliament won't stand for it. So the Trump approach is actually most damaging to our allies and creates a set of commitments and vulnerabilities to countries like Qatar who will indulge the corruption. I think it's, so what I have advised friends of our country is that kissing up to President Trump won't guarantee that you don't end up in the rifle crosshairs of his aggravation, but denouncing Trump will ensure that you do. And so, I don't think Mexico, France, Germany really have the luxury, because they are dependent either economically or for security needs on the United States. They don't have the option of a Xi Jinping, well, I'll burn your house down if you're going to try and light a fire in my yard, option. Whether Xi Jinping's strategy is successful is yet to be seen. It was in the first round. It brushed the Trump administration back on their first tariff threat. The Chinese are also holding some pretty good cards that others aren't holding because of the degree of economic interdependence and our reliance on things like rare earths, on Chinese mining and processing. So the Chinese could win this round. I wouldn't recommend any government that doesn't hold China's cards from trying it, though.
So, Rosa, same question. Some of our allies, though, go a little far on this. I mean, I've seen, some of the moments when, like, for instance, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is with Trump, and he's like, "Oh my God, do you have an 8-pack? It looks like you actually have an 8-pack. It's not just a 6-pack. You are the most handsome man I have ever seen." I mean, there are people who go a little bit overboard on this, and I find it, I end up revisiting my lunch in those occasions. What's your advice there, Rosa?
I think Kori's right. I both think, I think flattery is revolting and will buy no one anything for more than about 5 minutes, although it will buy them 5 minutes from here and there, and every now and then they'll luck out and it'll be 5 minutes in which sort of by accident he makes some policy decision. But certainly, as we know, Trump is not somebody who says, well, you've helped me out on these 5 occasions and so I owe you one. Trump, he will be as loyal to you as he was 30 seconds ago, which might depend a little bit on whether you just said something obsequious or gave him a really nice airplane or something like that. But that doesn't guarantee that, when he walks out of that room, he will remember that he likes you anymore. He will, so in a really short-term way, occasionally flattery gets people somewhere, but it won't get them anywhere longer term. So there's not too much point to it. On the other hand, if he feels like he's being mocked, sometimes he lashes out. So I feel for all of our allies who are struggling to thread that needle, because the U.S., like all dying predators, is dangerous. We still have the capacity. We have lost interest in being a global leader in any consistent way, but we still have the capacity to flail around and do real harm to both our allies and to the global publics in general. So I think everybody globally is in precisely the same situation that political leaders in the U.S. are in, which is that we're all essentially being, held hostage by this maniac. Not to put too fine a point on it.
Yeah, held hostage, and also I've noticed the more powerful a person is, the more we end up living inside their psychosis. So if he thinks the sky is green, we all end up going, "Oh, the sky is green," and it doesn't make.
We waste all of our time trying to explain that the sky isn't green, or trying to explain that although yes, we would all like it if the sky was green, we're going to work towards that end, and yet right? No, exactly. Everybody gets sort of sucked into this arguing on his terms, and that's part of what is so dangerous. That whole sort of Overton window. He's constantly shifting it by simply declaring things to be the case that are not the case, and then everybody starts scrambling around saying, but that didn't happen, or that's not true, which is a huge waste of everybody's time and energy. And meanwhile, half the American public believes him because they saw it on their social media feed.
So, Steve, what's your advice? How to handle Donald Trump?
Yeah, well, for all our sakes, we should. How to handle Donald Trump? First of all, as Rosa just indicated, you don't want to have him living rent-free inside your head all the time. That's important. But if I were advising a world leader, first, as Kori said, don't pick any quarrels unnecessarily. If he wants to be the aggressor, that's fine, but you don't want to pick fights with that or serve no good purpose. Second, don't trust anything he says, as Rosa said. Any promise he makes today, he could break tomorrow. And then third, and very importantly, you have to start hedging. Even if you have to start, making some adjustments and compromises in the short term, you want to diminish your vulnerability, diminish his leverage over time. Build up your own capabilities, start collaborating with others, make trade agreements with other states. And we see this now starting to happen in lots of different places. The fact that Saudi Arabia and Pakistan signed a defense pact, the fact that Prime Minister Modi of India went to China after his spat with Trump broke out. Other states have got to start exercising additional options. The real danger for Americans is that all those world leaders who come to the Oval Office and kiss up to Trump, the most polite way I can put it, they cannot be enjoying this experience. This is incredibly demeaning. This is the kind of thing you go home resentful. You complain to your aides about what you had to do, and you sit there hoping that at some point down the road you get a chance for a little payback. American influence is one of those things that can decline gradually and then precipitously if there are a lot of world leaders out there who are angry at what they've been forced to do. And I think that's the longer term danger of the insistence, Trump's insistence that people don't just have to deal with him, but they actually have to kiss the ring on frequent and demeaning occasions.
Yeah, there is also another possibility, Kori, and the other possibility, because as we turn our attention to what happens next, what's in the future, is that a bunch of these countries, like Israel is doing, like some of the Gulf states are doing, like I don't know, Georgia Maloney is doing, some others, Javier Milei. Will go so far to kissing Trump's butt that if there's ever a Democratic-controlled House of Congress, which may never happen, the Supreme Court today seems to be against the Voting Rights Act in a big sweeping way, but if there's ever Democratic control of a House of Congress or a Democratic president, they're going to go, hey, wait a minute, you're Team MAGA. You took sides politically in the United States. You're going to pay a price for that. Isn't there risk to some of them of getting too close?
So there is a risk, but most future American administrations would be sympathetic to the fact that that countries reliant on the United States in critical ways had to do whatever they could. The one country I think it is potentially deeply problematic for is the state of Israel, because I do think the Netanyahu government has been playing American domestic politics in ways that are resented among major Democratic politicians and are having effects on the relationship, on the attitudes of Americans towards the state of Israel, and not just Democratic Americans. And the choices Israel has made during the war in Gaza mean they have very little international support anywhere. And so the American relationship, it looms ever larger in Israel's own calculations in ways that Prime Minister Netanyahu has increased the risk for in the future.
David, could I add one point to that?
Sure.
Yeah, and Kori's exactly right about all of that stuff. And I would add, you also see some cracks within the Republican Party now and among the conservative movement of people, people like Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, being willing to criticize Trump for being too overly supportive, that this is not consistent with America First as they interpret it as well. So it's not just the Democratic Party. You're starting to see a bit of fracturing on the GOP side as well.
That's true. What are the other sort of down the road implications of all this, Rosa? Is your house there in Wyoming coming apart at the seams?
No, my dog is just racing around like a maniac for some reason. Scout! She's trying to dig a hole through the sofa cushion. Right.
Well, I have to say I'm a little envious of that because my dog is in the hospital today
How's your dog? I'm so sorry
because
to
he
hear that.
fell down the stairs and he tore both of his CCLs, which is like the ACL. And so he needs to have surgery over the weekend.
No.
And it's going to take 8 weeks to nurse him back to health,
Oh, God.
where he can't move. And we have to,
Breakfast in bed and
yeah, I have to spoon feed him applesauce for 8 weeks.
Rosa's dog, however, is trying to show the comptroller of the Department of Defense how to find money in the couch cushions.
maybe that's what she's doing. She's completely demolished that sofa over there. I don't know why.
Kori, did you get that statement about the Department of Defense approved by Hegseth's office before you made it?
We were unaware you'd signed the agreement, David.
Yeah. Wait,
I
no.
am, of course, a preferred correspondent of the Secretary of All Defense's office, being such an ardent supporter.
Yeah. I'm interested, Steve, in this idea that these countries are going to want a little back afterwards. That down the road they're going to go, okay, we have to put up with this stuff. We don't trust you anymore. We're not going to buy your jets, or we're not going to, treat you as we did once before with regard to the full faith and credit of the United States, right? In other words, you talked about it a little earlier, but there's got to be a soft power cost to this as well as a dollar and cents cost to it.
Yeah, I mean, the United States has, been an alliance leader and occasionally a heavy-handed one throughout the last 75 years or so. But by and large, those relationships worked in part because the United States was sort of the mailed fist, but it brought the velvet glove along. So even in the NATO context, we often dictated what we thought NATO policy should be, but we did listen to our allies. We didn't insult them on a routine basis. We didn't make, Charles de Gaulle or other European leaders come to the White House and bend the knee in this very degrading way, and that made American leadership more tolerable to others. We were also more reliable than I think the Trump administration is showing itself to being. You put those two things together, you have a bunch of states who are in the short term still very dependent on the United States, would like to try and preserve all the benefits of American protection, would like the United States to back off some of its coercive economic policies in various ways. But they understand that may not happen. They understand this isn't a trustworthy leader, and they really dislike being asked to pretend as though they're enjoying this whole process and to flatter this guy in all sorts of, nonsensical ways. And I think that eventually, if the opportunity presents itself, if the United States suddenly needs them in ways that would be valuable, if suddenly, China is continuing to eat our lunch on a number of different fronts, then it's not like suddenly other countries, our old friends, will necessarily rally around. There may be a certain amount of schadenfreude here. Oh. Good, we're glad to see you suffer a little bit because you sure made us suffer for a while, and I think that's not a possibility we really want to entertain.
I was asked recently a publication for a quick comment on what I saw as Trump's greatest foreign policy failures and what his greatest foreign policy success was. And my reaction, and Steve, I'm curious to know whether you agree with this, I think Kori probably won't, was that his greatest foreign policy failure and his greatest foreign policy success are the same thing, which is that he has utterly demolished U.S. credibility and leadership. He has ended the era of American global leadership. And that is a terrible failure and bad for the United States, but that in the longer run, at least, this may turn out to be something of a blessing for much of the rest of the world, insofar as it will be, if the success in that sense, unintended, it will be a prod, it has been a prod, and may continue to be a useful prod for them to develop, particularly U.S. allies, alternative mechanisms for addressing collective problems and so on that are not so dependent on the United States. And the U.S., of course, has been both a benevolent actor in some ways, but not always, right? We've been very inconsistent. Our interventions have not always achieved the results that we have hoped, or sometimes they've achieved the results that were good for us, but terrible for other populations and so on. So, this is, I don't exactly feel super cheerful about this, because I do think for those of us who live in the United States, it is a real failure, but that it may turn out for the rest of the world, maybe, I'm being a little optimistic here, what does not kill us makes us strong, right? And it's possible that things just fracture and collapse, or it turns into great power conflict between multiple great powers, all of which are horrific, right? So I don't think there's necessarily a fairy tale ending to this, but at least there's some possibility that the U.S.'s disappearance from global leadership acts as a really healthy prod and creates a set of opportunities and incentives that could turn out to be positive for much of the rest of the world.
So I would like to go to Steve last here, as he's our guest, and we're coming up on the end of our time. But I think Rosa raises a good question, or somebody raised with Rosa a good question, which is name his biggest success and his biggest failure. But before you get to that, Kori, is Rosa correct? Do you not hate America as much as she does?
So I agree that the president's destruction of an international order that has kept the United States safe and prosperous is his biggest failure. I think she's wildly optimistic that can end up as a good thing for us, or as she said, for other countries in the system. Because
Trying to come up with a success.
I never thought I would hear myself say this, but I think Rosa is just luridly optimistic about what the outcome is going to be for other countries if you don't have the U.S. underwriting an international order where we, as the hegemon, mostly play by the rules, and small and middle powers have enormous influence over the setting of the rules and the protections of the rules. So that sweet summer optimistic child, Rosa Brooks, I think is too optimistic. So I think that's the biggest failure. I think the biggest success is actually the extension of the Abraham Accords fundament into restraining the Israelis on Gaza. I think, it's not obvious there was a whole bunch of restraint. I could see you rolling your eyes, David.
Well,
But
no, there hasn't been a whole lot right so far, but yes, I get your point. And I think your use of the word fundament is well chosen, because I think he is trying to move. That was his biggest success the last time, and he's trying to move it forward. And we'll see. It's certainly early days. Same question to you, Steve, as we wrap up here.
Yeah, so Gaza could be the great success if it's then followed by the rest of the program, and if not, not. I think David and I would both be rather skeptical that we're going to get the next 18 points or anything like that. But that remains to be seen and has yet to be delivered. In terms of what's happened so far, I actually think Trump's greatest success is finally convincing the Europeans they have to start start taking their own security more seriously. He was given a great aid in that by his friend Vladimir Putin, whose invasion of Ukraine was also a big motivating factor for Europeans. So Europe, this was not done ideally. I think that he's poisoned that relationship in a variety of ways, but the one contribution is Europeans suddenly realizing that, it can be a dangerous world and they can't be defenseless. Asia, I don't give them strong points because, as I said earlier, on the one hand, they want to confront China, and on the other hand, they're doing everything possible to poison relations with our allies in Asia, from India to Japan. So I think that's problematic. And then I think I agree in part with Kori that that this is an administration that is not just unraveling any commitment to global rules or norms, but rather not participating in trying to develop a bunch of new ones. Even if the old Cold War order was over or fraying, the point is you need a set of rules to guide relations among countries, and we are allowing other countries, most notably China, to have a far more influential role in doing that, where we are basically not participating. Right. And I think over time we will wake up and discover in lots of different areas of global interaction, the rules, the playbook has been written by others, and the United States is forced to deal with a set of rules that it didn't negotiate, didn't participate in, and won't always be to our advantage.
Excellent points. And I hope everybody in the audience who's listening is grateful as I am for a respite from being too bogged down in the daily headlines, too bogged down in the politicization of everything, too bogged down in all the heavy breathing, and to have a moment of respite, to be able to take a step back, listen to three thoughtful experts, try to put things in perspective, is exactly why we started doing this 10 years ago, and why we're continuing to do it, because it doesn't come that often. But we are very fortunate, as all of you who are listening know, and for those of you who are watching on YouTube know, to have been joined today by Steve and by Kori and by Rosa. So thank you, guys. And to all of you who have listened, thank you very much. And if you liked what you listened to, I don't know, give it a thumbs up on YouTube, or follow it on, Instagram, or, go to the dsrnetwork.com and click on membership and sign up and be a member and spend a couple of bucks a month helping independent media company provide you with expert views like this all the time. We'd be grateful. For now, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Friends, it was great to see you. I'm sorry to bounce